I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the mistakes I've made, but I just wanted to start off with recognizing how many physician inventors we have in this city. And so this is just some of them up there. And if I don't have your picture up there, I'm sorry. So come to me later, send me a picture, I'd be happy to put it up there. But we have a lot of people in this town who have made a lot of big contributions to cardiovascular science and the cardiovascular industry and have been great inventors. And so, if you go to Des Moines, you're not going to find that. And if you go to Kansas City, you're not going to find that. And if you go to Dallas, you're not going to find that. So you're living in a very unique environment. So the question is, why is that? Why does Minnesota have so many cardiovascular medical device companies? I mean, we're a hub in the middle of a very cold area that's hard to recruit to. How did that happen? And the base really was started by Owen Wangenstein, who chairman of surgery at the U, started in the 30s, and he is recognized, I think, by most surgeons as the father of modern experimental surgical science, and no matter where you go. And so, and the Wangenstein building is a testimonial, I guess, to him. So that industry started really with his proteges in cardiovascular surgery at the U. Medtronic with Earl Bakken, who was an engineer outside the U, but worked for the U with Walt Lillehei. St. Jude with Dmitry Nikolov, who was at the U and then was at Abbott after that with Manny Villafana. Mayan Plastics, which you probably don't know about, but this was DeWall and Johnson and Lillehei. They made the first oxygenator for cardiovascular surgery, and obviously that changed the face of what you could do in cardiovascular surgery. And then obviously it grew with 3M adopting a lot of these medical things. SciMed, which people remember, and it became Boston Scientific cardiovascular arm here in the cities. Angiomedics, which was started by Bob Van Tassel, CPI, Microvena, AGA. You can go through the whole list of companies, but it all comes back to Owen Wangenstein and cardiovascular surgery and surgery at the U. So that created this base of scientists and engineers and technicians and attorneys and regulatory specialists and experimental labs. You don't have that other places. So there's no APS, which is now NAMSA. You want to do a valve research study. If you're in Kansas City, you don't have a place to do that, but you do here. So that allows everybody in this town the license to invent and to get something done. Okay, so you might say, well, why am I here? Dave said a little bit. So I've had three what I would consider major companies. One was Assist Medical, which we started in 1991. I came here in 86, started in 91. What used to be at McCormick's restaurant, what used to be whatever the hotel was there. We outlasted the restaurant, which was really good. And which maybe it's not hard to do, you could say at a restaurant, but and we made a contrast injection system, which now has about a 55% worldwide market share. And I would say it's become the standard for coronary angiography. I then did a heart valve, which we sold in 2010 to Bracco, which at the end of the day did not see the market. But we had a big clinical trial, and the company had a little problem. And now I'm doing Egg Medical, which is a scatter radiation protection system based in Arden Hills. I've had a lot of help from people in this room with this, so I appreciate that very much. And our goal is to become the dominant radiation protection system in the world for hospital labs, and to drop the dose of everybody worldwide by at least 90%, and with our new system, probably 99%. So I want to talk a little bit about medical device development, and I want to speak really to people that are inventors in this room. I hope some of it won't be duplicative or things you've already known. One thing that people think when you talk to doctors is that the idea is everything, right? I talk to these people, so okay, so I have the idea, and now it's just kind of buff and shine, and everything else kind of is going to follow from that. Well, it turns out ideas are really plentiful. So there's no shortage of ideas in this world. This is from 2015. I kind of take a time pre-pandemic. Over 500,000 patent applications in the U.S. in 1 year. The majority of which came from the U.S. Almost 300,000 granted. Total med device patents, 17,000 granted that year, over 17,000. Most of them began from the U.S. Minnesota was the #2 state in med device patents and continues to be. But we trail quite a bit California, which has almost 3-4 times what we have. But we are #2, okay? So we can put, we're #2. And if you look at that, of course, a lot of those are owned by companies, but 1,000 of those are individual patents somebody paid for. And so that tells you about the number of ideas that are out there every year waiting to be done. If you look at companies, it's a little different story. So, investments in ideas are less common. In 2015, and which was a very good year for industry, seed funding, 127 companies. So you have all those patents and you have 127 companies. And then at the end of that, you have 123 exits that year, most of which are acquisitions by larger companies buying smaller companies, about 18 by IPOs, which in today's standard, 18 IPOs for med device would be a lot. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of ideas out there, but getting that idea from the thing in your head to the thing that somebody's actually using, that's really where most of the work is. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I think, but I got to tell you, there are no rules in this business. What works, and everybody's got their own way of getting to places to see what works. So I want to talk mainly about this phase. So, you have an idea and you want to get that idea to be something. And everybody thinks it's like a straight course. I do this, and it's going to happen. That's not the way it happens. There's this non-specific, now I say screwing around phase. I used to say something else. But this non-specific screwing around phase, and there's really two phases to it. So the first thing is you have to define what it is. You have this thing in your head, you may have drawn it, but it's not it yet, because it's not it until you make it. When you make it, as you make it, it's going to change a lot because certain things in your head are not going to be practical. And is it patentable? Has somebody already done it? A lot of stuff people have done. I've had some ideas where you're searching, and I had this one idea for a great pulmonary hypertension device, and I'm searching on a Saturday morning, and this guy 4 years ago had patented the exact same thing. The exact thing. Now, probably never happened, but has somebody already done it? What's the market size? This is a big deal for doctors. So if you have something that has a market size that's quite small, it's probably not going to be a company, as we'll talk about. What's it going to take to develop this thing in terms of the actual dollars behind it? Does it make economic sense? And you got to figure out how to fund it and what valuation you can sell it at. So these companies start in stages. They have an idea. That leads to this phase. That phase is defined by, defining what it is. You got to make some Frankenstein prototypes that are just, really crude, but kind of allow you to learn a lot about what it is and how it might be better. And you've got to develop and file IP. We'll talk about that. Understand the market players, figure out the regulatory path for it, which is very important because the regulatory path can mean life or death for some ideas. What a quality system is. And then you get on to real product development. So this phase is probably the most important phase that you're going to go through and the one that has the biggest mortality. And then, of course, you got to raise money and you got to minimize spending. So don't spend money during this phase because the money you spend now is going to be the dearest money you'll ever have. As you get later and you have a higher valuation, it's easier to spend money. So this is, maybe a lot of you guys in the room know a guy named Norm Dan. And Norm's a sage. And Norm, I gave him, this is for Assist, this paper, we're looking for investment, and he said, so you're telling me this piece of paper is worth $1 million. Is that what you're telling me? And that is what I was telling him. But it's only valuable if it can be protected. If you don't own it, then you don't have anything. You just have an idea. And of course, it's got to generate value. Idea is not a company. It could be a product, could be a company. Most inventors, as I said before, think the idea is 90%. The reality is it's about 1 to 5% of the effort. That's where you start. The rest of it is a lot of grunt work. So just a little bit about patents for people that are not familiar with patents. There's 3 requirements for a patent. One is that it's new. And that it doesn't have to be like super importantly new, but it's got to be new. And which means nobody's done it before, at least in your area of work. It's a little different than publishing a paper where you see papers published on stuff that really is not very new. It's kind of repetitive stuff. The second thing is that it's useful. That's usually a relatively low bar to get across. And the third is that it's not obvious to somebody who is skilled in the art. Now, that actually is not a super high bar either, by the way. But that's the 3 requirements. And so the theory behind patenting is that you've got an idea. You're going to teach the public how to use that idea. So in your patent application, there's a detailed description, and the requirement is that you teach somebody else who's skilled in the art how they could do your thing. And then you get 20 years of exclusive use, and after that it becomes public property. So that's the reason for patents, is to get stuff out into the public and to teach people how to do things and not keep them as a trade secret. So, and then you have the claims, which are what you want to protect. It turns out the description is probably as important as the claims, because you can amend the claims over and over again as time goes on. So patents are equity. They're classed as an asset on your balance sheet, like a building. And obviously you want to build this fence around your idea and make the fence as expansive as possible. And so there's always this push and pull with the patent office about how expansive you can be and how much you can claim. And it's also a good idea to file a defensive patent. So you might say, well, I know 3 ways to make this, but there's another thing I would do if I were competing against myself. You should file a patent on that also, because you don't want somebody else coming in and stealing your lunch because of that. And patent problems do come back to haunt people. They don't usually prevent things, but it ends up you spending a lot of money on it. So it's better to spend up front. Before you file, you got to do this one thing which I talked about earlier, and that is you got to learn how to search for patents. So there's a uspto.gov website. You go to it. There's a search engine in it. It's not as good as it used to be. You can do a Google search, but you should search, because it's really expensive to initially have your patent attorney do it. These guys make about $700 an hour, and their underlings make about $350, $400 an hour. So you're kind of paying them to search. And the first search you probably should do should be by yourself. And you're going to find a lot of stuff you don't want to find. So it's really awful work, because you're doing this really dull scanning of patents, and you don't want to find anything. So it's very bad. And you got to find a patent attorney. Expect to pay about $25,000 for a patent, roughly, up front. That doesn't include foreign filings and all that stuff, but for a U.S. patent, it's going to cost you about $25,000. And now, under the new law, the first to file gets the patent. So when you talk to people about your idea, you probably should get an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, with most people, certainly with vendors and other people, and then just be quiet. Don't talk about it until you've got your filing reserved. And you can do a provisional patent, which is basically just a description you send to the patent office. It's not really a patent, but it kind of holds your place in line and says, I have invented this thing on this date, and that becomes your filing date. Okay, so second thing that's kind of dull that is important is medical device regulation. So there's basically 3 classes within the FDA, and how much money you have to raise and how long it takes you to get this thing out, and whether it's even going to be possible. A lot of it depends on the class. So class 1's low risk, tongue depressor, needle, drape, things like that. You self-certify that, you notify the FDA. Not a lot of regulation related to that. Also not a lot of money. Most of the devices that we deal with are class 2 devices, so monitors, catheters, even syringes and gloves, ventilators, injectors, assist injectors, class 2 device. Most of those can be done on the 510K pathway. So 510K was originally started where you could point to a predicate device in the thing. So you say, well, you know what, I have an injector. It's not exactly like the one that's out there, but there's another injector out there, and that's our predicate device, and we're just another iteration of that. And so we don't have to go through clinical trials. Usually it's just bench data that is required to get the approval. There's a statutory requirement that they respond within 90 days to the application. They usually respond with questions, which resets the clock. But the reality is you get a 510K, usually it's 6 to 12 months, mostly bench data. There's a new category called the de novo 510K, and that's where you don't really, it's a medium risk device or low risk device, but there's no predicate in the market, and that requires some clinical studies. But again, you're probably going to be approved within a year or 2, even with the de novo process. So everybody wants a 510K. So you'll hear investors say, is it a 510K? If you say yes, you're in good shape. If you say PMA, you're in bad shape. So PMA is high-risk device. So most implants, life-sustaining devices, heart valves, pacemakers, stimulators, all that stuff, those are so-called pre-market approval or PMA devices. They require a pivotal study, usually for safety and efficacy. That's going to take 2 to 4 years, and then you're going to have another 1 to 4 years of review time. So just after the thing is made, you can count that you're probably going to have 4, maybe plus years, maybe 6 years to get the thing approved. So remember, during that time, you're paying people, and you're paying rent, and you're producing device, and you have 0 income. So that really has a huge impact on the economics of development, and you can see why things like this have to raise an enormous amount of money, and they have to be very important because without it, you're never going to pay back that money. Okay, so the next thing is, how big is the market? So you see people say, you know what, I really like this little doodad, and it's really great. And you say, okay, well, how much can you sell that for, and how many do you think you're going to sell? And it turns out it's not very much. And it's going to cost you $1 million by the time, maybe $2 million to get it out, and you're going to make $50,000 a year on it. Well, obviously that doesn't work, and nobody's going to do it. So how do you do the market? Because the market's a dominant factor in deciding whether development's worth it. The best ideas do the greatest good for the largest numbers. That's kind of the theory. So I just do it on the back of a napkin, and you're going to pay a lot of people to do a market size for you and all this stuff, and somebody will do this eventually for you. But in my experience, the back of the napkin has been plus or minus 20, 30% of what the consultant comes in at. So it's actually not that bad. So, what's the number of customers you think you'll get for this thing? If everybody used it that could use it, what's the total number? How many are they going to purchase over a period of time? That gives you the volume you're going to sell. And then you take the volume times what you think you can get for it, and you get the market value. So I'll give you an example here. If I can move ahead here. There we go. So let's just say you have a new catheter. And it's the number of angiograms per year total that are done, the catheters per angiogram that you do, and that gives you the volume. And then you take that volume and what you think you can price it for in the market, what people pay for it, and that gives you the market size. So in the case of a catheter, there's about 700 cases per lab per year. Nationwide per cath lab room, there's about 19,000 labs worldwide. Let's say it's 2.8 catheters per case. Let's take it an angiographic catheter. That gives you 37 million catheters that you're going to sell per year. If you can get $20 a catheter, that makes it into a $747 million per year market. That's a pretty good market, right? So you wouldn't think a $20 catheter would be a good market, but it turns out you use a lot of catheters. And so in that case, it's very good. In other cases, the number might be quite small. So to be a company, it's got to be a big-ish idea. The market size got to justify all the infrastructure, because you can have sales, HR, management, maybe a clinical team, capital expense, all this infrastructure. And if the idea isn't big enough, it doesn't justify creating all that infrastructure. And so in general, if you want to use kind of a rule of thumb, if your market size is more than $1 billion, you're great. That's a company. 400 million to $1 billion, it's okay. For most things, that'd probably be okay. If it's under $400 million market size, that's probably more a product than a company, because it's not going to justify, you're not going to get that whole $400 million market, right? So at some point, you're going to have a company that's selling, $50 million a year, and they're going to do okay, but it's not going to be a big deal. So a single product, it's not a company, unless it's got a very large market potential. Okay, so what are you going to do if it's a product? Well, then you're going to license it, right? And I know a lot of people in this room have licensed products out, and so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But when you're licensing something, you're selling the thing that you own. You don't own it unless you have a patent. So that's where the patent becomes very important. So you have to own it because you're selling the patent. You're selling any early work that you might have done on it. If you don't have a viable patent application, a lot of times you won't even have it. Sometimes an application is better than a patent, because you never know what's going to happen to that application. It could be really big, right? You could get a lot of claims. But if you don't have that, you're not going to get anything. The value really depends on the market size, the investment, the things that we talked about. So you have to do your homework on this, because you're the person selling that patent or selling that idea to the acquirer who's going to make it. And you've got to have numbers to be able to justify that if you really want to get a good deal out of it. And how that deal's structured is very important to you. There usually is an upfront payment, and that should at least cover your costs of patenting and all that stuff from the beginning. Maybe a little spiff, and then there's going to be a royalty stream, which is typically somewhere between 2 and 10% of the gross, depending on what it is. And it's important to put minimums in there, because what a lot of companies will do, they buy your idea, and then they can't. It's just back someplace else, and it never sees the light of day, and then you'll never see a royalty stream from that. So there needs to be some guarantee of that. Okay, so if you really want to start a company, I would say it's a learning marathon. You got to do a lot of legal work. You got to learn to raise money, starting with your money, because nobody's going to put money in if you're not putting money in. There's a lot of team development, starting with you, because you're the first person on the team. You got to find space, you got to find people. management team. You got to learn a lot of regulatory. I mean, it's kind of fun in the sense you do learn a lot about a lot of areas, and you learn a lot about your product. I learned a lot about radiation physics, and this last thing I didn't really, I mean, I had a reasonable education, I would say, undergraduate-wise, but I've learned, and I've learned a lot about, we've contributed to science now, and about how some of the so-called science is actually not as accurate as you would think, not as applicable to cath labs as people would say. But if you do it and you're successful, it is a natural high. It is. There's nothing better actually when you're at the very end, and it's an incredible feeling, and one that I don't know, it's completely unique, but it's certainly great. You need a mentor, and I had a mentor early on, and that was Bob Van Tassel, and I think everybody in this room knows Bob. It's amazing the number of people that will help you if you just call them. It's great, and I heard I think it was Steve Jobs or somebody had called one of the Packard or Hewlett just out of the blue when he was like 18 years old, and asked him for an oscillator or something, I think, right? And he was more than happy to help him, right? So people will help you. You also need to get an experienced medical device attorney. And again, you live in Minneapolis, we got a lot of experienced medical device attorneys, but somebody specialized in that area, particularly in kind of startup to sale experience for that, because there's a lot of legal stuff that is important, and they will teach you a lot as well. Okay, so phase two. So you decide, okay, the market size is okay, got a patent, and now I want to start a company. So you got to go through a bunch of steps here, define your management team, raise money, build prototypes. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of those steps. First of all, when you start a company, you have a couple of choices about what kind of company it's going to be. It could be an LLC, which is a little simpler, consists of partners rather than shareholders, and the initial losses flow equally to the partners in proportion to the share that they own. It can be difficult to subtract or add partners. That's the problem. So you're not going to have an LLC with 100 partners, probably. You could, but typically not. Most people start a corporation, and these corporations, they start them as an S corporation, subchapter S corporation. The advantage of a S corp, it's supposed to be a small, closely held corporation that sells shares. The beauty of it is that the losses that you take every year, and there will be losses, flow through to the shareholders' personal income tax. So if you own a quarter of the company, a quarter of the loss goes to you, and you can deduct it from your income tax straight, which is great. At some point, you'll become a C Corp. If you take any foreign money, if you get over, I think, 100 investors, something like that, there's some rules about it. But at some point, you become a C Corp, and at a C Corp, then those losses no longer flow through to you. But as an investor and raising money early, being an S Corp is very attractive for people, because they like to get the loss immediately recognized rather than later when you end up selling. And of course, you issue shares. Okay, so a business plan you got to develop, and I call it a necessary evil. There's a book by a great business guy. It's called Burn the Business Plan, because nobody ever does it. I mean, you have this business plan, it's all laid out, and there's never a straight line to where you're going anyway. So if you look at the business plan in the beginning and what you actually did, it's probably not going to match very well. But you've at least got to think through the steps of how you're going to get from your idea to getting to the eventual thing that you want. So it's a blueprint, it's got all this stuff on it, how you're going to develop the management team, how the equity is structured, the risk, the competition, financials, et cetera. But the main purpose is to raise money, because you're not going to raise money without having a business plan. Nobody's going to say, hey, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. We're just going to freelance it, and would you please write me a check for $500,000? That's not going to happen. So it is important to have it. And again, there's a lot of people in town who can help you with that business plan. Because what you write, at least what I write, is probably not very good in the beginning. It's not. There's a lot of hole in it, and maybe I'm not concentrating on the right thing that's going to resonate with potential investors. So get help with that business plan. And then you got to create a board. So the board represents the shareholders. It hires the CEO. You're probably going to have the majority of shares, so you're going to control the board. So you can be, if you want to be the CEO, you can be the CEO. It sets the comp and controls all the stock issuance. So people think that the CEOs can just issue options in stock. You can't do that. That's the job of the board, is to control the capital aspects. They approve the budget, and the main thing is they're a resource for management. So typically you have a board of 3 to 7 people, and you want some strengths on the board. You want somebody who's a fundraiser, who has good fundraising connections. And you'd like some industry leaders that can help you by connecting you to other people, or can help you with manufacturing if you're at that point. And these board members may change out over the life of the company, but they're really there to help you. And so you've got to select the people, and you got to have good chemistry. You don't want a board that you're at odds with, right? You have to have a board that trusts you. And trust me, you're going to get venture capital people on your board, because part of their investment is going to be that they have to have 1 or 2 seats on your board, and they're not always so nice. So you have to have people that like you and are going to be part of your team on the board. And then you got to learn how to run a board meeting. So I'll tell you what Bob Van Tassel did for me. We went to breakfast. He said, you got to learn how to run a board meeting. So fine. So meet me for breakfast. So we meet for breakfast. He carries a big box of board books with board meeting minutes in it, and he just starts pulling them out and basically says, this is how you run a board meeting, which is great, and something which you can't get probably anywhere else. Okay, so the next thing is, who's going to run this business? So investors are really betting on the management team more than the product, and so they want a management team that's experienced and can take this thing through to sales. If you're a doctor or a scientist without business experience, the initial answer might be maybe you in the initial development piece, but when sales start, it's probably going to be not you. And it probably shouldn't be you, because you don't know sales. And there's a lot more than I really have ever thought there would be to sales. So you may end up, particularly if it's your first company, passing that off to somebody that's more experienced in that area. You got to have some charisma, industry experience. I've learned a lot about, so if you look at the people that are CEOs that come from the sales industry, they're kind of like doctors in the training, in the sense that they almost always started out with a big company, Kendall, J&J, somebody, when they were young, and they learned the ropes of the business. And just like for us, when a patient comes in and you hear this story and you go, something's not right with that story. Something's wrong. You see a set of data, something's wrong with that data. I'm not sure what it is, but something wrong. We got to check something. They have the same sense, because there's a lot of industry norm in sales. And so, somebody wants to do something, that doesn't sound right. We don't have that spidey sense for that stuff. We have it for medicine, but we haven't built it for the other stuff. So that's what they bring to the table that's very helpful. This is from my friend Dan Gladney. Companies don't fail, they run out of money. And so your number one job as a CEO is to make sure that that thing is funded. And so there's no straight line to that. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But just as a general fundraising piece, when you're raising money, you have a founding of the company. And then usually the founders, friends, family they're going to end up putting in about $1 million roughly just to do the flesh out in the first non-specific screwing around phase. And you're going to do that on a valuation of probably 1 to 10 million, depending on what the idea is. And then you're going to need some more money, and that's seed money. And those are usually angel investors who are higher net worth people, maybe some of the people in this room. Small funds, family offices. And typically in Minnesota, you're going to raise between 1 and 7 million for that. If you're on the coast, you probably could get up to 15 million on an angel round. We're a little more limited here. Those valuations are going to be somewhere between $3 and $20 million, again, depending on the idea. And then you do a Series A. Series A is more money. It's usually VC money or private equity money, maybe corporate partners. Medtronic might invest if this is something they think they might want to acquire later. And usually on valuations of 10 to 40, and then you go to Series B, which is much more serious money. And again, that's going to be the same group, VC, private equity, corporate partners. The SBA and DoD have grants, which are terrific, which you could do for new breakthrough technologies. It does take quite a long time to get them, 7, 8, 9, 10 months. The amount is relatively small. Initially, it might be under 100,000. You can't really do that much with that. But up to $1 million. The beauty is it's a grant. It's not, no equity is given. So you just get the money. You don't have to give any shares out for that. So that's a big advantage. But from a practical standpoint, most people go through these phases in raising their money. So, the money has different strings on it, right? Angel money is great because it's friendly and you get a good valuation on it, but limited quantities. VC money, the VCs have a lot of money, They're deal makers. They do help you later when you want to sell that company or you want to make some kind of a deal. They can be very helpful with that. They drive a very low valuation. So you might raise money on a valuation of 10 million, and then the VC comes in and we think it's 5. And that's a down round, and you really don't want that. So you've got to really negotiate with them. You lose control. They're going to take some board seats. It takes a lot of time. For management, it's a big time sink. The best money, I think, is corporate money. Corporate money, or strategics as they call them, they have a lot of money, strategic fit. They typically invest at a very good valuation. They're not so cash sensitive. And it can lead to an acquisition because they may end up buying the company. The problem is they're typically limited to 15 to 20% of your company because under the tax rules, if they own 20% or more, that goes on their balance sheet, and they don't want your loss on their balance sheet. So typically it's around 15% because you might have a down round and they might end up owning 20% at the end of the day. So limited funds initially for that. But that's oftentimes kind of the route that people take, angels to VC to corporate partners. When you found a company, you authorize a certain number of shares. You might say, I'm going to authorize 10 million shares. And then you're going to give a certain number of shares to yourself. And you're going to sell them to yourself at usually a penny, something like that, whatever the par value is. And so let's just say it's 5 million shares at a penny, which means you're putting 50,000 in for that. And then you have a remaining 5 million shares that are for sale. You don't have to sell all those shares, but they're available for sale if you choose to do that. So to raise the money, you sell some of those shares. The share price is pretty arbitrary, but it's based on the company's valuation. So you take the valuation divided by the number of issued shares, not the total 10 million, but the number of issued shares, and that's the share price. So if you had a $5 million valuation, you got 5 million shares out there, it's $1 a share, which is very typical for initial startup money. My advice is take all the founder shares you can in the beginning. And the reason is it has favorable tax consequences afterwards. There's this IRS Rule 1208, I think, which I found through TurboTax, by the way, not through the lawyer, which says that if you're a founder and your company raises, I think, less than $50 million and you've held it for more than 3 years, that when you sell that stock, half of it is not taxed. Half of it has no federal tax. And that goes through the state also. So because they just take half off the books on your federal return, which is a huge, huge advantage for that. So it doesn't count for the other shares you get later. It doesn't count for options, anything like that. It's only those founder shares that really count. Raising money is, it's kind of hard. And it's a lot of sales stuff that we don't normally do as physicians. There's an initial investment round, which starts with a private placement memorandum for accredited investors. Those are people that basically have money, I think they make more than $250,000 or $200,000 a year, have $1 million in net worth. It's a legal document. You're going to write the plan for that. It's basically going to be your business plan, but the lawyer's going to put in a lot of stuff that have all the legal caveats about how risky it is. And then you got to go find investors. So you got two choices, right? You have people that you know that you're going to go to maybe, or you can hire a firm to do it. Typically, when it's really early, you don't have people you know that you can do this to, and you're not experienced in that, and you end up hiring a firm like Cedar Point Capital. We have a couple firms here in town that have a Rolodex that will, and then you go make your pitch to these guys. They're going to take about 5 to 10% of whatever they raise. So it's not cheap, and it's not always certain that they'll get the money raised. So, and remember, when you're raising money, it's a negotiation. You can expect pushback on valuation. So, you're going to put a number out there, they're going to put a number out there, and you're going to try and negotiate that to the highest number you can get. You need a pitch deck. Everybody's heard of a pitch deck. It's a PowerPoint deck, no more than 20 slides, preferably 15. Tell your story, pump the market need, the market size, emphasize the management, forward financials. They're going to want to see a 10x out early on. They're going to want to see 10x. So you got to show them how they can get to a 10x return. And, it might not be 10, but I think the last couple I did, it was a 7x return, a little north of 7 for one of them. And so that's not a bad return, but you got to show how you can get to a 10x. Otherwise, most people early on, they're just not interested. And the reason, and by the way, you got to name drop also. So it's got to be glitzy. These people are very superficial. So, you got to give them something to look at. And I would get help with this. That's the number one. And I got a lot of help with it, and I'm not very good at it, but you know, I did get some stuff done. So objective facts sell. They got to have somebody that they can call on the management team, on the board, the scientific advisory board. They need people to call to verify what you're saying is true. So as much as you can do that, you know, IP patents, they speak very loudly as well. Experimental data speaks very, very loudly, but objective facts really sell, and you got to give them something to look at. A prototype is very, very helpful, even if it's a handheld prototype, but it makes it real. It's not just a piece of paper that you're saying is worth $1 million. And then you got to say, well, how much? They're going to say, well, how much is this company worth? What is your valuation? And for startups, you know, that's not a science exactly. It's an art of saying what this idea is worth, and how you do that is tough. But you know, generally you do this financial forecast, and then you've got a risk of the investment, which is the management team and the prevailing business conditions, which also affect it, because if the market's terrible, people don't have money to invest. So the best time to get investors is when the market's great and people are selling and they've got all this play money sitting around. If you do it, you know, like in 2009 when there's no play money on the table, very hard to raise money, because it's a high risk investment and people kind of put their excess money typically into this kind of stuff. As I said, they have to have a 10x return. And the reason is, if you invest in 10 companies and 8 fail, but 2 return 10x, then your overall return is 2x on a very high risk set of investments. So that's why they need to see it. The basket's got to perform very well, and you got to sell your valuation. So I'm going to give you a valuation exercise. And I'm going to ask people what they think it's worth. So you got an inventor, he's got an idea for a medical device, starts a business, risky idea. It's probably going to work if they can design it and figure out how to make it. It's going to take about 3 years, they think, to get to market. So the device has a $100 million potential market. That's what we've calculated based on the way we did the market size before. And you think it's going to have net earnings of about 20% when you get done. Overall investment to commercialize it, you think it's going to be about $10 million, roughly. What's that idea worth right now? Paul, what do you think?
$1 million.
Okay. Nick? You're a savvy investor.
Tell that to my financial people. Since he said 1, which is what I was thinking, I'll go 5.
5. Okay. Well, let's just take a look. Well, okay, so it depends, of course, is the answer, right? So $10 million development cost, 3 years to market. And usually they have a discount rate, what's called a discount. So people are investing money in them, they're really loaning money to you, and they're eventually going to get it out. And so they're going to put an interest rate on that to the time that they get it out. But if you do everything you say you're going to do, and it goes like that, it's about a $12 million valuation roughly for that. And that means you're going to own 55% at the end of the day when it gets done. But let's say it takes 5 years instead of 3 years to get to market, which is the norm, right? And it might actually take $20 million for it, but let's just say it takes 5 years. Now the value is $2 million because you're holding that money for a much longer period of time, and interest keeps accumulating on that money. It's compounded. And your ownership at that point is 18%. So that's a big difference. So regulation drives the timetable. And that's when we talked before about, you know, is this a 510K device or it's a PMA? Makes a big difference on the valuation that you're going to get. And so when you look at, this is just for a 510K device, this is from, I think it might actually be from FDA data. If you look at the amount of money, this is dollars and thousands, that you raise along each one of these phases, you can see, you know, concept development, clinical development unit, relatively small amount of money, and then the FDA-related expenditures, you know, getting the IDE, safety stuff, pivotal stuff, processing the 510K, all that time, that's actually where the money is. The money is really not in the initial development, it's in the final part. So having that regulatory path really well done is important, and there's a guy in town, blocking on his name, that developed the drug-coated balloon for peripheral stuff. Anyway, his legend in the community is that he got his product through the FDA, through a clinical study, under budget and under time. So he's like a legend now, because that like never happens, right? But that just tells you how important the regulatory path is, and that means you need a regulatory strategy. And so there's a lot of rules. Everybody's got to be 13485 certified. That's kind of your quality system. There's a lot of general rules, and everybody in clinical research here knows GCP. There's good manufacturing practices, good laboratory practices, all that stuff. So you need to learn all that stuff, and you got to get a regulatory consultant, because again, this is such a critical path. The beautiful thing about Egg Medical is we're not regulated. It's technically not a medical device because the feds don't regulate radiation shielding material. And which is, I can't tell you what a huge difference this is. You can actually make changes to it like overnight. It's great. But in Europe, they would not accept that it wasn't a regulated device, that it didn't have a CE mark, because it's not eligible for CE mark. So in Europe, we had to make it into a medical device by showing that it reduced patient radiation as well, and then we got a CE mark. But in the US, it's not regulated, so that's great. There are a lot of security laws. I don't want to talk a lot about them, but you got to get a good lawyer. There are a lot of security laws. You definitely don't want to go to jail for securities fraud. And you're going to sell stock, and it's really serious money. And so that's going to go into a bank account. That's got to be accounted for. You've got to be audited. All this other business. So, one more thing. You have to sell it. So you get this thing developed and you get it approved, but you got to sell it. I don't want to talk a lot about sales, but I can tell you one thing I learned about sales. It's expensive. It's very expensive. So the majority of capital raise often goes to building the sales organization. You know, like for Assist, I think we raised $7 or $8 million to do the product, and another $20 million to get the sales organization up. So over 2 to 1. You know, they all have salaries. A lot of them make more than you do, and bonuses. They get travel, and they have all these tools, Salesforce, and all these other software programs that you got to buy. So it's a lot, and you need experienced people, because if you have a beta male out there selling your stuff, it's not going to happen. You got to have people that are experienced, that know how. I mean, I kind of learned it's really an art. You know, really, doctors and hospitals are terrible customers, really. I mean, they suck up a lot of time, and they're very picky, and so and I've also, and doctors are lousy salespeople, including myself. It might be you're too honest. That's possible, but you're just not into kind of shepherding things through the process, because there is a process that you have to go through hospital. A lot of materials people and all that stuff you have to be able to interact with, and you need to change sales leadership as the company grows. The person that's right for initial deal, which might be somebody who has a lot of KOL contacts and super likable. You're going to need somebody else that's more of a manager as you get a company growing. So a lot of people are going to change as the company grows. And then finally, you need an exit strategy. Somewhere there's got to be liquidity. So it's either going to be sale to a larger company, which is, I showed you before, is about probably 80% of the way that med device companies exit, or an IPO. And IPOs kind of depend on the market, and one year it's good for IPOs, another it's not. But investors are looking for a payout. They're not looking for dividends. So at some point, there's got to be a liquidity event where the investors can get their money out of the company. And so you've got to be thinking about that really very early on. And some of the strategic investments that you get a lot of those are aimed at positioning your company for acquisition by that other larger company, so your investors can get liquid. But so a lot of strategic piece to that I think is very important. And then I was looking for I want to talk about pivot last, because I mean, there's always a twist in the road. Something always fails. My old business partner used to say a bomb goes off in the building every day somewhere. The market hates something you make. There's economic disaster in the market. This stuff, it's, as Rosanna Dana would say, it's always something. There's always something. So I was looking for an example of a company that pivoted, and I found this. Actually, Twitter started out as Odeo, which I did not know, which was a search destination website for syndicated audio, and that failed. But they had all this software stuff, so that then became Twitter. And so the importance of pivot is, I think, really important, because you are going to pivot in this business. And I would say even with Egg, we started off with a mat that you could lay on that would do all your vitals, mostly wirelessly. And I went and I asked 30 cath labs. I asked the manager and the lab director, 15 in the US, 15 in Europe. And I said, do you want this? And they said, oh, yeah, that'd be really great. Yeah, good, good, good. And I said, well, how much would you pay for this? Oh, I think we'd pay $7,000 for that. Well, it's going to cost like $7,000 to make it, so that's not going to work. So then I said, well, what if we added radiation protection to that? Go, oh my God, that'd be great. It was like instantaneous. And then I heard this story over and over again, and you say, well, what if we could get to like, I don't know, 50% radiation protection? Oh, that's $30,000. And what if we get to 90%? Oh, that's 55. And what if we get to 99? It doesn't matter. We would pay anything for that. Millions, it doesn't matter. And you get that message. And so that clearly was where the market was excited at. They weren't excited about the other piece. They liked it, but it wasn't like a big driver for them. And that's how we got to radiation protection for that. Not that we're going to come back and put that mat in at some point, but for right now, that's obviously what people want, and so that pivoting is very important. And I hear a lot about yeah. So it takes a long time to become an overnight success, and most of these companies you could figure from the time you start to the time you end and an event occurs, it's typically around 10 years, roughly, plus or minus 3 or 4. And there's just a lot of persistence in that, like a lot of things in medicine. There's a lot of persistence, and the willingness to accept a new reality and adapt, I think are probably the keys to that. But having that kind of base learning period is fantastic. You learn a lot of stuff. You learn a lot about science. You learn a lot about business. You learn a lot about people. And it's an experience which, as I said before, is kind of a natural high at the end of the day. So great. Thank you very much. Yes.
I imagine it's changed over time, but would you say, in addition to your clinical practice, has this been an extra full-time job?
Yeah.
2 times full-time
Yeah.
job?
Yeah, my wife used to say you have 4 jobs. You got to cut down to 3. Yeah, I mean, the view was a little bit better because I probably could take, time here and there. But it is because it's a nighttime weekend thing. I can remember I did when we were doing the first deal with Bronco. I would fly to Italy. I would fly out in the evening. I'd meet with them in the morning. I would fly back that night. And that is brutal. And it wasn't in the front of the plane either because, you're a startup. So you're at the back of the, good bathroom access, but other than that. So yeah, it is, finding that time balance, I think is really, really hard. I would say if you're a physician, it is important to keep that clinical perspective. And even with that, I'm in the lab about a day a week at the U. And I don't want to give that up because you think, oh, well, we should do X, Y, and Z, and then you stand there in the lab at the table and you go, that's not going to work. Because you don't realize what your priorities are. When you're in the company thinks that product is everything. Everybody's focusing on that one product, and this is the star in the room. When the reality is, you want that product to fade into the room and not be a star in the room because you're thinking about the patient's blood pressure and all this other stuff. And so it really grounds you, I think, a little bit to stand for. But that time management is tough. It's tough. And that's where, early on, if you're doing your first company, you really should have, you got to hire somebody to be the CEO of that company. And somebody you really get along with and can partner with. You can be the executive chairman, but you need somebody that's there all the time. Yeah.
Fantastic talk and really enjoy what you showed. It's a completely different field of what we practice and very enlightening. If you were to look back, yourself and the other entrepreneurship, what are the characteristics that are so important that make them either successful, but what are the differentiators that, if you were to put, they have this in common, what would that look like?
Well, I think you have to be realistic, right, and be willing to change. So you do see people that they develop a product, they're absolutely convinced that it's perfect as it is, and they're really smart. They're the smartest person in the room, and they're going forward with their view and their direction. And the reality is you got to learn a lot going away from a lot of people. And I've learned a lot about different skill sets that I'll probably used to denigrate, and now I realize that they actually are really important skill sets that I don't have, and so you've got to learn from it. So this kind of willingness to accept a new reality, I would say, is probably the single biggest thing, to be flexible. And you know, it's like anything, you have to know when to stand your ground and when you're not right, and you have to learn from somebody else. And so if you have the personality that can do that, I think you're in good shape. And you have to be kind of inventive, because you know, there's a lot of things that happen, and you got to get out of it somehow. And it can be financially, but there's got to be a financial deal that you can make, like with an investor, right, that will make everybody happy. And so you have to invent a new pathway for that. And so like when we, second company, when we sold that, you know, we had it was a really weird contract, but it was to make sure that they felt comfortable, and we want to make sure we got the money. So you may have to do some inventive stuff. Great.
Anything else online, John?
No
Good.
online questions, so
Okay.
unless there's anything else in the room, thank you so much.
All right.
Great, thanks, guys.